Have you ever felt something strange happening in your life lately? Not something obvious, not something you can easily explain, just a quiet shift, a feeling that something is changing beneath the surface while everything around you appears exactly the same. Maybe you've noticed certain people becoming distant. Maybe messages arrive less frequently. Maybe someone who once seemed deeply connected to you suddenly stepped back without explanation. At first, it feels confusing. Then it becomes painful. Your mind searches endlessly for answers. What changed? What did I do wrong? Why would someone who cared suddenly disappear? But what if this distance has nothing to do with rejection? What if the very thing that feels like a loss is actually the beginning of the greatest transformation of your life? Most people never realize that before a major breakthrough, life often removes distractions, illusions, and attachments. The universe creates space before it delivers something greater. And during this process, people who were once close begin acting differently, not because your value has decreased, but because your energy is changing. Tonight, you're about to discover the hidden psychological signs that reveal you're entering a powerful new chapter. And one of those signs involves someone who loves you more deeply than you realize, yet chooses to stay away, stay until the end, because the final sign changes everything. There comes a moment in every person's life when chasing no longer feels natural. For years, you may have been the one making the effort, sending the message first, checking in, trying to fix misunderstandings, carrying relationships on your shoulders while convincing yourself that if you just tried a little harder, everything would work out. But lately, something feels different. You're tired. Not physically, spiritually, emotionally. You've started questioning why you're investing energy into people who give very little in return. This shift may seem small, but psychologically, it is enormous. When a person stops chasing, they begin reclaiming power. Carl Jung often explored the hidden forces operating beneath conscious awareness. He believed that true transformation begins when we stop seeking validation outside ourselves and start confronting our inner reality. And here's what most people don't understand. The moment you stop chasing, the entire dynamic changes. The person who was accustomed to your attention suddenly notices your absence. The person who assumed you would always be available begins feeling uncertainty. The person who never feared losing you starts wondering what happened, not because you've become colder, but because you've become stronger. People rarely appreciate what is constantly available. Human psychology is wired to notice change, and when your energy shifts from pursuit to self-respect, others feel it immediately, even if they cannot explain why. This is why someone who genuinely cares about you may suddenly stay away. At first glance, it makes no sense. If they care, why not move closer? Because sometimes distance isn't a sign of indifference, it's a sign of internal conflict. They see you changing, they see your growth, they sense your increasing confidence, and subconsciously, they're forced to confront a question they've been avoiding. What if I lose this person forever? Many people withdraw when they experience emotions they don't fully understand. Instead of moving forward, they hesitate. Instead of expressing feelings, they observe from a distance. Instead of speaking, they think, over and over again. While you interpret their silence as disinterest, they may actually be processing something much deeper. But here's where things become even more fascinating. The best stage of your life often begins with loneliness. That statement sounds uncomfortable because nobody wants to feel alone. Yet look closely at every major transformation. Before the butterfly emerges, it enters isolation. Before a seed becomes a tree, it disappears underground. Before a person discovers their highest potential, they often experience separation from familiar people, familiar habits, and familiar versions of themselves. The old identity begins dying, and that process can feel incredibly lonely. Many people mistakenly assume something is wrong when their social circle becomes smaller, but often the opposite is true. You're becoming more selective, more aware, more intentional. Conversations that once entertained you now drain you. Drama that once captured your attention now feels exhausting. Validation that once seemed important now feels meaningless. You are evolving, and evolution always creates distance between who you were and who you're becoming. This is one of the strongest psychological signs that a breakthrough is near. Not comfort. Discomfort. Not certainty. Transition. Not stability. Growth. Think about the periods of your life that transformed you the most. Were they easy? Or were they filled with confusion, uncertainty, and emotional challenges? The answer is obvious. Growth rarely announces itself with comfort. It arrives disguised as chaos. And that's exactly why so many people miss it. They interpret transformation as failure. They interpret temporary setbacks as permanent defeat. They interpret loneliness as abandonment, when in reality, life is preparing them for something greater. There's another sign that often appears during this stage. You begin seeing people's true intentions. Suddenly, masks become visible. Words and actions stop matching. Promises feel empty. Excuses become obvious. For years, you may have ignored these inconsistencies because you wanted to believe the best in others. Now you notice everything. This heightened awareness isn't making you cynical. It's making you conscious. And consciousness changes everything. Once you see clearly, you cannot return to blindness. This is why certain relationships begin falling apart during periods of personal growth. Not because you're becoming difficult, but because you're becoming authentic. False connections struggle to survive in the presence of authenticity. People who benefited from your insecurity feel uncomfortable around your confidence. People who enjoyed your endless availability become frustrated by your boundaries. People who took you for granted become confused by your independence. And some will even accuse you of changing. They're right. You have changed. That's the point. Growth demands change. Remaining the same would be the real tragedy. Now here's where things become incredibly interesting. The person who has stayed away may be experiencing something unexpected. For a long time, they were comfortable with the old version of you, the version that chased, the version that waited, the version that tolerated uncertainty. But now they see someone different, someone focused, someone grounded, someone who no longer depends on external validation, and this creates psychological tension, because your transformation forces them to confront their own lack of transformation. Growth is contagious. It inspires some people and intimidates others. This is why someone who loves you deeply may remain silent. Your evolution has become a mirror, and not everyone is ready to look into it. But don't misunderstand this. Their silence is not your responsibility. Your mission is not to rescue them. Your mission is not to convince them. Your mission is not to chase them. Your mission is to continue becoming who you're meant to be. Because the greatest opportunities arrive when your focus shifts inward. Many people spend years trying to control external outcomes. They obsess over who likes them, who texts them, who chooses them, who validates them. Meanwhile, they neglect the most important relationship of all, the relationship with themselves. The moment that relationship improves, everything changes. Confidence grows. Decision-making improves. Boundaries strengthen. Opportunities appear. And strangely enough, people who ignored you begin noticing you. Why? Because genuine self-respect creates a magnetic presence. People can feel it. Even when you say nothing. Even when you do nothing. Energy communicates before words ever do. This is why the next chapter of your life may already be unfolding, not because circumstances have changed, but because you have. And when you change internally, external reality eventually follows. The signs are already there. Your tolerance for nonsense is disappearing. Your desire for peace is increasing. Your intuition feels stronger. Your priorities are shifting. Your standards are rising. These aren't random experiences. They're indicators, signals, evidence that your life is preparing for expansion. Most people will never reach this stage because they keep returning to old patterns, old relationships, old fears, old identities. But something inside you is refusing to go backward, even when moving forward feels uncertain. And that inner resistance to settling for less may be the clearest sign of all. Because the best stage of your life doesn't begin when everything becomes perfect. It begins when you finally realize your worth was never dependent on anyone else's recognition. And once that realization takes root, everything starts changing faster than you imagined. The question is, if the people who once overlooked you suddenly began noticing your value tomorrow, would you still want their attention, or have you already outgrown the version of yourself that needed it? Now let's talk about something that almost nobody notices until it's already happening. The best chapter of your life rarely begins with excitement. It begins with detachment, not the cold kind of detachment that pushes people away, the healthy kind, the kind that frees you from emotional dependence, the kind that allows you to care deeply without losing yourself. For years, many people unknowingly hand over their emotional power to others. Their happiness depends on a text message. Their confidence depends on attention. Their peace depends on how someone else feels about them. And because of this, their emotions are constantly controlled by circumstances outside their control. One day they feel valuable. The next day they feel invisible. One day they feel loved. The next day they feel abandoned, not because their worth changed, but because they attach their worth to external reactions. Then, something shifts, sometimes through heartbreak, sometimes through disappointment, sometimes through betrayal. Life teaches a lesson that cannot be learned any other way. You begin understanding that your value exists independently of anyone's opinion. And once this realization takes root, a remarkable transformation begins. You stop begging for understanding. You stop proving your worth. You stop fighting to be chosen. Instead, you become the person who chooses themselves. This is where true power begins. Because self-respect changes the way you move through the world. You walk differently. You think differently. You speak differently. Even your silence becomes different. And people notice, far more than you realize. Many individuals spend years searching for a secret formula that will make others appreciate them. What they fail to understand is that appreciation often follows self-respect. When you recognize your own value, you teach others how to value you. When you set standards, you reveal your expectations. When you establish boundaries, you demonstrate self-worth. And when you stop tolerating what diminishes you, everything begins reorganizing around that decision. Some people rise to meet your new standard. Others disappear. Let them. Not everyone is meant to accompany you into the next stage of your life. This truth can be painful, but it is also liberating. Because growth requires space. Imagine trying to climb a mountain while carrying unnecessary weight. Every step becomes harder. Every movement becomes slower. Every challenge feels heavier. The same principle applies psychologically. Old resentments, old insecurities, old attachments, old versions of yourself. All of these become weight. And eventually life asks a simple question. How high do you want to go? Because the higher you rise, the less unnecessary weight you can afford to carry. This is why many people experience unexpected endings before major breakthroughs. Friendships fade, relationships change, certain opportunities disappear. At first it feels unfair, later it feels necessary, because hindsight reveals what emotion could not. Some things had to leave so better things could arrive. This doesn't mean every ending is easy. In fact, some endings hurt deeply, especially when they involve someone you genuinely care about, especially when they involve someone who cared about you. And perhaps there is someone like that in your life right now, someone whose absence still echoes in quiet moments, someone who crosses your mind when the world becomes still, someone who stepped away even though the connection felt real. If that's true, listen carefully. Not every separation is rejection. Sometimes people leave because they are confused. Sometimes they leave because they are afraid. Sometimes they leave because your growth confronts them with truths they aren't ready to face. And sometimes they leave because life is forcing both of you to evolve separately before any future can exist. The problem is that most people never give transformation enough time. They rush toward conclusions. They assume silence means the story is over. They assume distance means feelings disappeared. But human psychology is far more complex than that. People often need distance to understand value. They need silence to hear their own emotions. They need absence to recognize what presence meant. This is why chasing rarely works. The more you chase, the less space exists for realization. The more you pursue, the less opportunity exists for reflection. The more you force, the more resistance you create. But when you release control, something extraordinary happens. Truth reveals itself. People reveal themselves. Intentions reveal themselves. And outcomes reveal themselves. Without manipulation, without pressure, without exhausting yourself. This is one of the deepest lessons many people spend years learning. You cannot force clarity. You can only create space for it. And right now, life may be creating exactly that space. Not to punish you, not to deprive you, but to prepare you. Because preparation is often disguised as loss. Think about the strongest version of yourself. The version that exists beyond fear, beyond doubt, beyond limitation. That version is not created overnight. It is forged through experiences, through challenges, through moments that force growth. Every disappointment teaches discernment. Every setback teaches resilience. Every ending teaches wisdom. And eventually, the lessons accumulate. One day you wake up and realize something incredible. The things that once broke you no longer have the same power. The situations that once controlled your emotions no longer control them. The people who once defined your self-worth no longer define it. You have changed, not because life became easier, because you became stronger. This strength is one of the clearest signs that you're entering the best stage of your life. Not because everything is perfect, because you're no longer waiting for perfection before you begin living. You realize happiness isn't a destination, it's a way of moving through the journey. Peace isn't something you find, it's something you create. Confidence isn't something you're given, it's something you build. And once these truths become part of your identity, life starts feeling different, lighter, clearer, more meaningful. Even challenges begin serving a purpose. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin asking, "What is this teaching me?" That single shift changes everything. Victims ask why, creators ask what next. Victims focus on obstacles, creators focus on possibilities. Victims wait for circumstances to improve. Creators improve themselves and influence circumstances. Which one are you becoming? The answer may already be visible in your recent choices. Because if you've continued moving forward despite uncertainty, if you've continued healing despite setbacks, if you've continued believing despite disappointment, then you're already becoming the person capable of receiving what once seemed impossible. And here's the fascinating part. The moment you stop desperately searching for proof that your life is improving, proof begins appearing everywhere. In your mindset, in your habits, in your confidence, in your opportunities, in your relationships, in the way you carry yourself. You begin attracting experiences that reflect your growth. Not because the universe suddenly changed, because you changed. And reality often mirrors identity. This is why the next chapter of your life may arrive sooner than you think. The foundation is already forming. The lessons are already integrating. The transformation is already underway. You don't need to force it, you don't need to chase it, you don't need to fear it. You simply need to continue becoming the person your future requires. One decision, one habit, one day at a time. Because the truth is, the life you've been hoping for is not built in a single moment. It's built through countless invisible moments. Moments when nobody is watching. Moments when quitting would be easier. Moments when faith is stronger than evidence. And those moments are shaping your future right now. So as this message comes to an end, remember this. Someone may be staying away because they're finally realizing your value. Someone may be silent because they're confronting emotions they can no longer ignore. Someone may be watching your transformation from a distance, wondering how you became so strong. But none of that is the most important thing. The most important thing is that you're beginning to realize your own value. You're beginning to see your own strength. You're beginning to recognize the incredible person emerging beneath every challenge you've faced. And that realization changes everything. So tell me in the comments, what is the biggest sign you've noticed recently that makes you feel you're stepping into a completely new chapter of your life?